The sun hung low over Fort Worth on that July evening in 1874, casting long shadows through the single window of the Morrison boarding house room. Eleanor Morrison sat beside her brother's bed counting coins for the third time that hour. $12 lay in her palm, still 12 no matter how many times she recounted them. The doctor's invoice on the bedside table demanded $200. Thomas slept fitfully, his 14-year-old frame too small beneath the threadbare quilt, his breath rattling in his chest like stones in a tin can. Each exhale seemed to take more effort than the last. Ellie watched the rise and fall of his chest, her own breathing unconsciously matching his labored rhythm. Outside, a wagon clattered past. Someone laughed in the street below. Life continued, indifferent to the quiet desperation unfolding in this cramped room that smelled of carbolic soap and fever sweat. She reached out and smoothed Thomas's hair back from his damp forehead. The boy didn't stir. For 3 days he had burned with fever, the consumption settling deep in his lungs, despite the medicine she could barely afford. Dr. Calloway had been blunt that morning, his words precise as a scalpel. Surgery, $200. Without it, the boy had perhaps 2 weeks. Ellie stood and moved to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. The street below pulsed with evening commerce. Cowboys fresh from the trail merchants closing their shops. Women in fine dresses stepping carefully around horse droppings. She had sewn some of those dresses, her fingers pricked raw by needles, her eyes strained by candlelight work that paid pennies, honest work, she had told herself, clean work. The kind her father would have wanted for her if her father had been the man everyone believed him to be. But James Morrison had not been his real name, and the story of his death 3 years ago had been built on lies she had carefully maintained. Only she and Thomas knew the truth, and Thomas had been too young to fully understand. She had changed their names, moved them from town to town, always one step ahead of the past that nipped at their heels like a hungry dog. Her father had taught her many things: how to read and write when most girls learned only to cook and sew, how to shoot a pistol, though she had never fired one in anger, how to recognize a man's character by the way he treated his horse, how to survive. But he had never taught her how to survive this, how to watch her brother die because she lacked money, how to make a choice between dignity and desperation. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. 3 sharp raps, precise and impatient. Ellie turned from the window, her hand instinctively moving to the kitchen knife she kept on the small table. She had learned caution in the years since her father's death. "Who is it?" "Family, Eleanor." The voice sent ice through her veins. She knew that voice, though she had not heard it in 3 years. Uncle Silas, her father's brother, the man who had disappeared the week after her father's hanging, taking with him what little money remained from the sale of their Arkansas farm. She opened the door a crack, keeping her body blocking the entrance. Silas Hartwell stood in the dim hallway, hat in hand, looking older than his 48 years. His face carried the same sharp features as her father's, but where James had been solid and strong, Silas seemed hollowed out, as if something essential had been carved away. His hands trembled slightly, the mark of a man too long acquainted with whiskey and cards. "I heard the boy was sick," Silas said. His eyes tried to look past her into the room, but she shifted to block his view. "We're managing." "Eleanor, I know you. You're too proud to ask for help, just like your father. But I also know you don't have $200 for the surgery young Thomas needs." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "How do you know about that?" "I know many things." "May I come in?" Every instinct screamed at her to refuse to slam the door to protect the fragile sanctuary she had built from the ruins of her old life. But Thomas made a small sound behind her, a whimper of pain, and she found herself stepping aside. Silas entered slowly, removing his hat. He looked at Thomas with something that might have been genuine sorrow, though Ellie had learned not to trust emotions that showed so plainly on a man's face. The ones who hid their feelings were often more honest than those who displayed them like merchandise in a shop window. "He looks like your mother," Silas said quietly. "God rest her soul." Ellie said nothing. Her mother had died when Thomas was 2, her constitution weakened by poverty and heartbreak, one more casualty of her father's choices. Silas turned to face her fully, and in the lamplight she could see the years etched deeply around his eyes. What Ellie didn't know was that Silas, in his weakness and his guilt, had already written letters to 3 men from the old gang telling them where Blackjack's daughter could be found. He told himself it was insurance, a way to protect her if anything happened to him. In truth, it was simply one more betrayal in a life built on them. "I owe you an apology, Eleanor. I ran when your father died. I was weak and afraid, and I left you and the boy with nothing. I've lived with that shame these 3 years. Is that why you're here to apologize?" "I'm here to make amends." He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded paper. "I have a proposition. It's not pleasant, and I won't pretend it is, but it will save Thomas's life." Ellie's fingers tightened on the back of the chair she stood beside. "I'm listening." Silas laid the paper on the table, smoothing it out with those trembling hands. It was a contract of some kind, the words dense and legal. "There's a man in Fort Worth named Harrison Wolfe. He owns the Golden Rose Saloon, among other establishments. He's a wealthy man with political aspirations. The territorial governor is pushing for statehood, and men like Wolfe want to appear respectable when that happens. He needs a wife of good character to improve his standing with the territorial legislature." Ellie's stomach turned cold. "You want to sell me?" "I want to save your brother," Silas said, his voice low and urgent. "Wolfe is willing to pay $500 for a marriage of convenience. 1 year. You would live in his house, appear at social functions on his arm, maintain the appearance of a proper marriage. After 1 year, he'll grant you a divorce, and you'll be free. Thomas will have had his surgery and a year to recover. You'll have money left over to start fresh somewhere else." A marriage of convenience. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. "And what does Mr. Wolfe expect during this year?" "Only what I said. Appearances. He has other arrangements for his baser needs. He wants a respectable wife, not a mistress. The contract specifies separate bedrooms, financial support, and dissolution after 12 months. Ellie moved to the window again, her back to Silas. In the street below, a young couple walked arm in arm, the girl laughing at something her companion said. What would it be like, she wondered, to walk through the world so lightly unburdened by the weight of impossible choices? "Why me?" she asked without turning around. "Surely there are other desperate women in Fort Worth." The silence stretched long enough that she finally looked back at him. Silas's face had gone pale. "Because I owe your father a debt I can never repay, and because I know a man who can watch over you during this year, a man who owes your father the same debt I do." "Who?" But Silas shook his head. "That's not my story to tell. All you need to know is that this arrangement isn't as dangerous as it seems. Wolfe will keep his word. He's many things, but he honors contracts. And at the end of the year, you and Thomas will be free." Behind her, Thomas coughed a wet, rattling sound that seemed to tear its way up from deep in his lungs. When it subsided, his breathing was shallower than before. Ellie looked at the contract on the table, at the numbers written there. $500. Thomas's life measured in currency, her dignity weighed against her brother's next breath. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Everything has a price, Eleanor. The trick is knowing what you're willing to pay." "I need to think about it," she said. "The surgery needs to happen this week," Silas replied. "I need an answer tomorrow." After he left, Ellie sat beside Thomas's bed until the candle burned low. She held his hand, feeling how small it was, how fragile. This boy who looked up to her as if she held the answers to everything, who still believed in her, despite all the ways she had failed to protect him from the harsh realities of their world. At dawn, she found Silas waiting in the boarding-house parlor. "I'll do it," she said, "but I have conditions." They stood in Harrison Wolfe's office that afternoon, Ellie, in her only decent dress, her hair pinned up in a style that had been fashionable when her mother was alive. Wolfe sat behind a massive desk of dark wood, his bulk settled into a leather chair that creaked under his weight. He studied her with eyes that calculated value, the way a butcher might assess a side of beef. "She's acceptable," he said to Silas, as if Ellie were not standing right there. "A bit thin, but that can be remedied. Good bone structure, she can read and write." "Yes," Ellie said before Silas could answer. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. "I can also do accounts and speak French." Wolfe's eyebrows rose slightly. "French? How cultivated." The word dripped with mockery, but he nodded to the lawyer standing in the corner. "Draw up the contract. Standard terms. $500 paid half now half upon completion of the marriage ceremony. The ceremony itself will take place in 3 days. I need the money today, Ellie said. My brother requires surgery immediately. Your brother? Wolf smiled, showing too many teeth. Yes, Silas mentioned the sick boy. Very well, you'll have 300 today. The rest when we're wed. Consider it insurance that you won't run. The contract was placed before her. She read every word, her father's training making her careful and thorough, despite the urgency clawing at her chest. Separate residences in Wolf's house. Public appearances as required. No conjugal expectations. Divorce papers filed exactly 1 year from the date of marriage. Her hand shook as she signed her name. Eleanor Morrison. The letters formed by a hand that had once been steady. She watched ink dry on paper that bound her future to a man she despised, and felt something inside her calcify into a hardness she had never known before. Thomas had his surgery that evening. Doctor. Calloway worked for 3 hours while Ellie waited in the boarding house parlor, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her nails drew blood from her palms. When the doctor emerged wiping his hands on a towel stained red, he looked exhausted but satisfied. The boy will live, he said. The infection was extensive, but I believe we caught it in time. He'll need rest and careful nursing, but with proper care, he should make a full recovery. Ellie closed her eyes and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Thomas would live. Whatever price she paid, whatever degradation awaited her in Harrison Wolf's house, her brother would live. It was enough. It had to be enough. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparations. Wolf sent a dressmaker to measure Ellie for a wedding dress, though the woman's pursed lips and knowing glances made it clear she understood exactly what kind of wedding this would be. The dress was white because Wolf insisted on maintaining appearances, but it fit poorly and smelled of the cheap perfume the dressmaker used to cover the odor of sweat and tobacco. Ellie's only adornment was the silver locket her mother had given her on her deathbed, a simple oval that contained her parents' portraits. She had never opened it beyond viewing those painted faces. It was the last piece of her old life she allowed herself to keep. Stone's hand briefly touched the locket at her throat as he helped her onto his horse, but he said nothing about it. On the 3rd morning, July 17th, Ellie stood in the small room at the boarding house and looked at herself in the cracked mirror. The white dress hung on her frame like a shroud. Her face looked pale and drawn, her eyes too large in her thin face. She looked like a woman going to her execution, not her wedding. She had no shoes. The only pair she owned had fallen apart weeks ago, and she had been making do with boots too worn to be respectable. Wolf had not thought to provide her with any, and she had too much pride to ask. Thomas sat propped up in bed, still weak but conscious and improving. He looked at her with eyes that understood more than a 14-year-old boy should. "You don't have to do this, Ellie," he said, his voice still hoarse from the surgery. She crossed to him and took his hand. "Yes, I do. But he's a bad man. Everyone knows what Wolf is. I know what he is too. But I also know what I'm doing and why. This is my choice, Thomas. Not his. Not Silas's. Mine." She kissed his forehead and left before he could see the tears she refused to let fall. The ceremony was to take place in Wolf's private office, with a minister Silas had found a man too fond of drink to ask uncomfortable questions about the nature of the union he was consecrating. Ellie walked through the streets of Fort Worth in her ill-fitting white dress, her bare feet growing hot on the sun-baked dirt. People stared. Women whispered behind gloved hands. Men looked at her with a mixture of pity and contempt. She kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, her shoulders back, her chin high. If they wanted to see a victim, she would disappoint them. If they expected shame, they would find none. She had made her bargain with the devil, and she would walk into hell with her head held high. Wolf's building stood at the corner of Main Street and 5th, a 3-story structure of brick and false promise. The Golden Rose Saloon occupied the ground floor, already doing brisk business despite the early hour. The upper floors held Wolf's offices and private apartments. Ellie climbed the stairs, her bare feet silent on the wooden treads. The office was dim curtains drawn against the afternoon heat. Wolf stood by the window dressed in a black suit that strained across his considerable girth. The minister, a small ferret-like man with trembling hands and the distinctive nose of a chronic drunk, waited by the desk with his Bible clutched like a shield. Silas stood in the corner, his face carefully neutral, but his eyes couldn't quite meet hers. "Well," Wolf said, turning from the window, "shall we begin?" The minister opened his Bible, his voice reedy and uncertain as he began the familiar words. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." The phrases washed over Ellie like dirty water. She barely heard them, her mind retreating to a place deep inside where she could observe this moment without truly experiencing it. Wolf's hand was damp when he took hers. His fingers were thick and soft, the hands of a man who had never done physical labor. She forced herself not to pull away. The minister had just opened his mouth to continue when the door opened. The man who entered did so without knocking, without hesitation, with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to going where he pleased. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders broad enough to fill the doorway. His clothes were simple, a work shirt and denim pants, boots dusty from riding. A gun belt sat low on his hips, the revolver worn smooth from use. His hair was dark brown, long enough to brush his collar, and a scar traced a pale line down his left cheek from eye to jaw. But it was his eyes that captured Ellie's attention. Gray eyes the color of storm clouds over the prairie, and in them a hardness that spoke of things seen and done that could never be forgotten. "Wolf," the man said. His voice was deep, quiet, but it carried an edge that made the minister take a step backward. "I heard you were planning to marry a young woman today. I wanted to see if the rumors were true." Wolf's face flushed red. "Stone, this is none of your concern. Get out of my office." "See, that's where you're wrong." The man called Stone stepped fully into the room, his gaze moving to Ellie and stopping there. For a moment something flickered in those gray eyes. Surprise, recognition. It passed too quickly for her to be certain. "This becomes my concern," Stone continued. "When a man of your reputation forces a woman into marriage—" "Forces." Wolf laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The girl came to me. We have a contract duly signed and witnessed." Stone's eyes never left Ellie's face. "Is that true? You want this marriage?" The question hung in the air between them. Ellie felt the weight of it, the opportunity hidden in those simple words. She could say no, she could walk away, but Thomas would die, and she would have nothing, and the debt would remain unpaid. "I need $500, she said, her voice steady, despite the hammering of her heart. "Mr. Wolf has offered that sum in exchange for a year of marriage in name only. If you have a better offer, I'm listening." Something shifted in Stone's expression. Was that respect? He studied her for a long moment, and she met his gaze without flinching. Whatever he saw there seemed to satisfy some internal question. "I need a housekeeper," he said finally. "Double Star Ranch 20 miles north of here. The work is hard but honest. Room board and $50 a month. I'll pay you 10 months in advance. $500. Ellie's breath caught. "Why would you do that?" "Because I need the help, and because I don't believe any woman should be bought and sold like cattle, no matter what contract she signed." Wolf stepped forward, his face purple with rage. "The girl signed a legal agreement. She's mine." Stone's hand didn't move toward his gun, but the threat was there nonetheless, implicit in the stillness of his posture. "A contract signed under duress isn't legal, Wolf, and we both know what the sheriff would say if I told him about this little arrangement." "You have no proof of duress." "I have a room full of witnesses who just heard a barefoot girl in a borrowed dress say she needs money to save her brother's life. That sounds like duress to me." Stone's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "Let her go, Wolf. There are plenty of other women in Fort Worth willing to marry you for money. Find one who actually wants to." The tension in the room pulled tight as a bowstring. Ellie stood frozen between the two men, aware that her future hung in the balance of whatever happened in the next few moments. Wolf's hand twitched toward the desk drawer where Ellie knew he kept a pistol. Stone saw the movement too. "Don't," Stone said quietly. "You'll be dead before you touch it." The minister made a small squeaking sound and edged toward the door. Silas remained in his corner, his face ashen. Finally, Wolf's hand fell to his side. "Fine, take her. But you owe me, Stone. I'll remember this." "I expect you will." Stone turned to Ellie and extended his hand. "Miss Morrison, do you want to come work at the Double Star Ranch?" She looked at his hand, calloused and scarred, offering something she couldn't quite name. Freedom, perhaps, or just a different kind of cage. But when she looked into those gray eyes, she saw something she hadn't expected. A carefully controlled anguish, as if he carried wounds that had never quite healed. He was dangerous, this man. She knew it instinctively. But danger came in many forms, and at least this one offered her a choice. "Yes," she said, and placed her hand in his. His grip was firm but careful, as if he were aware of his own strength, and took pains to control it. He led her toward the door, his body positioned between her and Wolf, in a way that was clearly protective. They were at the threshold when Wolf's voice stopped them. "You'll regret this, Stone. Both of you." Stone didn't turn around. "Probably. But I'll regret it on my own terms." Outside, the afternoon sun blazed down on Fort Worth's main street. Stone's horse, a tall bay with a white blaze, stood tied at the rail. He helped Ellie mount, his hands respectful, his touch brief. Then he swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to take the reins. "Hold on," he said, and urged the horse forward. They rode through town at a walk, and Ellie was acutely aware of the stares that followed them. Stone seemed oblivious to the attention, his focus on navigating the crowded street. His arms formed a cage around her, not trapping but sheltering, and she could feel the steady beat of his heart against her back. At the edge of town, he nudged the horse into a trot, and Fort Worth fell away behind them. The prairie opened up before them, vast and golden in the late afternoon light. The sky stretched overhead, endless blue unmarred by clouds. They rode in silence for a long time. Ellie's mind churned with questions, but she found herself reluctant to break the quiet. There was something peaceful about the rhythm of the horse's gait, the warmth of the sun, the solid presence of the man behind her. Finally, as they crossed a shallow creek, Stone spoke. "Why did you agree to marry Wolf?" "I told you. I needed the money." "For your brother's surgery." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "Yes, Thomas is all I have left." "Your parents?" "Dead." The word came out flat, final. She didn't elaborate, and he didn't press. They rode on. The land began to change, the flat prairie giving way to gentle rises and falls. Cottonwoods lined the creek beds, their leaves rustling in the wind. In the distance, Ellie could see hills, purple with shadow. Stone reined in the horse suddenly, his body going tense. Ellie followed his gaze and saw what had caught his attention, a large flat rock beside the creek, half hidden by tall grass. On its surface, barely visible, someone had carved letters, J.H., 1869. She felt Stone's breathing change, becoming shallow and controlled. His arms tightened around her just for a moment before he forced himself to relax. "What is it?" she asked. "Nothing. Just a marker." But his voice had changed, become rougher, and when she tried to turn to look at his face, he urged the horse forward again, moving past the rock quickly. But not before Ellie had seen the way his jaw clenched, the way his eyes fixed on those carved initials as if they were a ghost made visible. J.H. James Hartwell, her father's initials carved in stone 5 years ago, a year before he died. The realization crept over her like cold water. This man, this stranger who had rescued her from Wolf, knew something about her father. The timing, the location, the way he had looked at her in Wolf's office with that flash of recognition. She wanted to ask, wanted to demand answers, but something stopped her. Fear, perhaps. Or the sense that some truths were better left buried for now. Instead, she said nothing, and they rode on through the golden afternoon toward a future she couldn't predict. The Double Star Ranch appeared as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. It was smaller than Ellie had imagined, a collection of buildings clustered around a main house. The house itself was modest, a single-story structure of rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney rising from one end. A barn stood nearby, corrals spreading out from it in neat lines. A few cattle grazed in the distance, their forms dark against the golden grass. "It's not much," Stone said, his first words in over an hour, "but it's mine. Built it myself after the war." He helped her down from the horse, his hands steady on her waist. When her bare feet touched the ground, still sore from the walk through Fort Worth, she couldn't quite suppress a wince. Stone noticed. Of course he did. His eyes missed nothing. "You have no shoes," he said. They wore out. I couldn't afford new ones." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded toward a small cabin set apart from the main house. "That's the housekeeper's quarters. Used to belong to my foreman before he moved to the bunkhouse with the other hands. It's small, but it's private. You'll find some basic supplies inside. Tomorrow I'll take you into town for proper clothes and shoes. And don't worry about the money Wolf gave you for the surgery. I'll settle that debt with him tomorrow. Consider it part of your advance wages. I can't accept charity." "It's not charity. It's an advance on your wages. You'll work it off." His tone was matter-of-fact, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he understood her pride and wouldn't insult it. Ellie walked to the cabin, aware of Stone watching her. The door opened with a creak of hinges that needed oiling. Inside, the single room was Spartan but clean. A narrow bed, a table and chair, a small stove in the corner. A window looked out toward the main house. She stood in the center of the room, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion. The events of the past 3 days crashed over her all at once. The decision to sell herself the contract signed in Wolf's office, the stranger who had intervened the ride across the prairie, and now this. A small room in a place she didn't know, dependent on a man whose motives she couldn't fathom. The tears came without warning, silent and unstoppable. She sank onto the bed and let them fall, her shoulders shaking with the force of emotion she had held back for so long. Outside, Stone stood in the deepening twilight, his hand raised to knock on the cabin door. He could hear the sound of her crying, muffled but unmistakable. His hand hovered there for a long moment, then slowly dropped to his side. He turned and walked back toward the main house, his steps heavy. In the shadows of the porch he stopped and looked back at the cabin, at the single window where lamplight now glowed. And in that moment his mind flooded with memories he had spent 3 years trying to forget. A younger man himself kneeling in the dust beside a bleeding figure. James Hartwell, his face pale, blood spreading across his chest from a bullet wound. The sound of hoofbeats in the distance, riders approaching. Marshall's men coming fast. "Caleb," Black Jack's voice barely a whisper. "The children. Promise me. Ellie and Thomas, keep them safe." "I will. I swear it, Jack." "The girl." A cough, more blood. "She doesn't know. About me. About what I was. Let her keep that innocence." "Jack, hold on. We can—" "No." A hand gripping his arm with surprising strength. "This is how it ends for men like us. But not for them. Promise me, Caleb. Whatever it takes. I promise." The memory faded, but the weight of that promise remained. Stone, Caleb Stone. Formerly Caleb Rowan, formerly a member of the Hartwell gang, stood in the darkness and felt the full burden of what he had taken on. He had searched for James Hartwell's children for 3 years, following dead-end leads across Texas and into Arkansas. He had never found them, had begun to believe they had disappeared entirely. Perhaps died, perhaps escaped to somewhere he couldn't follow. And then today, standing in Harrison Wolf's office, he had seen her. The tilt of her chin, the shade of her eyes, the stubborn set of her shoulders. Black Jack's daughter, grown into a woman who faced down devils with the same courage her father had shown facing down death. Eleanor Morrison, Eleanor Hartwell. The girl he had sworn to protect, standing barefoot in a borrowed wedding dress, selling herself to save her brother's life. He had intervened without thinking, driven by the promise he had made to a dying man. But now, with her safely on his land, he faced the truth of what he had done. She looked so much like her father that it hurt to look at her. Every time she met his eyes, he saw Jack looking back at him, accusing, questioning. What right did he have to protect Jack's daughter when he had failed to save Jack himself? Inside the cabin, Ellie's tears had finally stopped. She lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind too exhausted to think clearly. Tomorrow she would have questions. Tomorrow she would demand answers. But tonight she was simply grateful to be somewhere safe, somewhere far from Harrison Wolf and his calculating eyes. She thought of Thomas recovering in the boarding house with money for his care. She had done what needed to be done. The price had been high, but he would live. And this man, this Caleb Stone, whatever his secrets, whatever his connection to her past, had given her a chance she hadn't expected. She would take it. She would work hard, save her money, and at the end of her contract she and Thomas would leave. They would go somewhere far away, somewhere no one knew the name Hartwell, and they would build a new life. It was a good plan, simple, clean. She didn't let herself think about the carved initials on the rock or the way Stone's arms had tightened around her when he saw them. She didn't let herself wonder what secrets this ranch held or what debts she might unknowingly be paying. Tomorrow would bring answers. Tonight, she simply closed her eyes and let exhaustion carry her into dreamless sleep. Outside, Caleb Stone stood watch until the light in her window finally went dark. Then he walked to the barn to the hidden compartment beneath the tack room floor and removed a small leather journal. By lamplight, he turned to a page marked 3 years ago. There, in Jack's familiar handwriting, was a list: names, dates, the members of the Hartwell gang, and what had become of them. Most were crossed out, dead, imprisoned, or disappeared into new lives. Only 2 names remained unmarked: Caleb Rowan, Marcus Kane. And below that, in different ink, more recent, Caleb had added one more name in his own hand: Eleanor Hartwell, found safe. He stared at those words for a long time, then closed the journal and returned it to its hiding place. The girl was safe, for now. But Marcus Kane was still out there somewhere, and Marcus knew about Blackjack's daughter. Marcus knew about the money, the gold that had never been recovered from the gang's last job. The gold that everyone believed Blackjack had hidden somewhere before his death. Marcus would come looking eventually. Men like Marcus always did. And when he came, Caleb would be ready. He had failed Jack once. He would not fail Jack's daughter. The moon rose over the Double Star Ranch, silver light washing across the buildings and corrals across the cabin where Eleanor Morrison slept her first night of freedom, across the man who stood guard in the shadows, keeping watch over promises made to the dead. In Fort Worth, Harrison Wolfe sat in his darkened office nursing a glass of whiskey and a burning hatred. Caleb Stone had humiliated him. The girl had slipped through his fingers. But Wolfe was a patient man, and he had resources Stone could only dream of. There would be a reckoning. Sooner or later, there always was. And in a boarding house 3 towns away, a man named Marcus Kane read a telegram that had taken weeks to find him. Blackjack's daughter located. Fort Worth, Texas. Working at Double Star Ranch for Caleb Rowan. Marcus smiled and folded the telegram carefully. After 3 years of searching, the pieces were finally falling into place. Blackjack had died without revealing where he had hidden $50,000 in gold coins, but his daughter might know, and even if she didn't, she was leverage. Leverage against Caleb Rowan, who had once been Marcus's partner before Caleb had grown a conscience. It was time to collect old debts and claim what was owed. Marcus Kane began to pack his bags, whistling an old trail song as he worked. Fort Worth in July. It would be hot, dusty, and profitable. He couldn't wait. The first part of this story ends here with 3 people bound together by promises and secrets, by debts unpaid and violence deferred, each unaware of how deeply their fates had become entangled. Eleanor Morrison believed she had escaped one trap, only to find temporary refuge before moving on. Caleb Stone believed he could honor his promise to a dead friend while keeping his own past buried. Marcus Kane believed the gold was within his grasp at last. All 3 were wrong. But that truth would take time to reveal itself, unfolding slowly, like a wound that won't heal clean, like a storm gathering on the horizon, like the inevitable settling of debts that compound with interest until payment becomes unbearable. The bargain had been made. The devil would have his due. But not yet. Not tonight. Tonight, under the Texas stars, there was only silence and the soft sound of wind through prairie grass, and the watchful waiting of a man who knew that peace, when it came to men like him, was only ever temporary. 3 years earlier. Huntsville, Prison, Texas. The night before dawn. Caleb Rowan walked through the stone corridors of the penitentiary, his boots echoing against walls that had absorbed the despair of 1,000 condemned men. The guard who led him was young, nervous, his keys jangling with each step. They stopped before a cell at the end of the row where a single lamp cast shadows that writhed like living things. 30 minutes, the guard said, and retreated far enough to grant the illusion of privacy. James Hartwell sat on the edge of a narrow cot, his hands folded in his lap. He looked older than his 45 years, his face gaunt from months of prison food and the weight of approaching death. But his eyes were still sharp, still held that intelligence that had made him legendary among the men who rode the outlaw trail. "Caleb Rowan," Jack said quietly. "I wondered if you would come." Caleb gripped the bars between them. "I had to. To explain, to apologize, to ease your conscience." There was no anger in Jack's voice, only a weary acceptance. "It doesn't matter now. Tomorrow morning they hang me." The past stops being relevant when a man can count his remaining hours on two hands. "I didn't betray you, Jack. You have to know that. What I know is that the marshal's men were waiting at Miller's Creek. What I know is that half our crew died in that ambush. What I know is that you survived, and I'm here." Jack stood moving closer to the bars. "But I also know you came back for Silas. You could have run, but you rode back into that hell to pull my worthless brother out of the crossfire. A traitor wouldn't do that." Caleb exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he had been holding for 3 years. "Then you believe me." "I believe you're a complicated man, Caleb. I believe you wanted out of the life, wanted to go straight, and I believe that wanting made you careless. Someone talked. Whether it was you or someone else, the result is the same. Men died. I'll die tomorrow. The only thing left is what comes after." "Your children," Caleb said. "I'll find them. I swear it." Jack's expression softened, became almost human again, beneath the hardness prison had carved into him. "Ellie and Thomas. They're all that matters now. Silas has them, God help them. My brother is weak, Caleb. He loves them in his way, but weakness and love don't keep children fed. I'll make sure they're safe, provided for. There's something else you need to know." Jack glanced toward the guard, then lowered his voice. "Thomas isn't mine. He's Silas's boy, born to a woman who died bringing him into this world. I took the child as my own, raised him alongside Ellie. She doesn't know. Thomas doesn't know. Silas was too ashamed to claim his own son." The revelation hit Caleb like a physical blow. "Jack, why are you telling me this?" "Because Silas will run. When fear takes him, and it will, he'll abandon those children without a backward glance. When that happens, I need you to know the truth. Thomas may not be my blood, but he's still family. Protect them both. Promise me." "I promise." Jack reached through the bars, gripping Caleb's shoulder with surprising strength. "And Caleb, the girl, Ellie. She's strong like her mother was stubborn like me. She doesn't know what I really was, what I did. Let her keep that innocence. Let her remember a father who loved her, not an outlaw who stole and killed. She'll never know from me. There's no gold, Caleb. I want you to know that. The stories about 50,000 from the last job about money I hid somewhere, lies. We lost it all in the ambush. If anyone comes asking, if anyone tries to use my children to find money that doesn't exist, you stop them. Whatever it takes." The guard's voice echoed down the corridor. "Time's up." Caleb held Jack's gaze for one more moment, memorizing the face of the man who had taught him to ride to shoot, to survive in a world that showed no mercy to the weak, the man he had failed. "I won't let you down again," Caleb said. "You never let me down the first time, son. You just made a mistake, and mistakes are what make us human. Now go, live the life we talked about, build something clean, and when you find my children, give them the chance we never had." Caleb walked out of Huntsville prison that night and never looked back. The next morning, as the sun rose over Texas, James Hartwell climbed 13 steps to a gallows platform and died with his secrets intact. But some secrets, like some debts, refused to stay buried. The memory faded as dawn broke over the Double Star Ranch on July 18, 1874. Caleb Stone, no longer, Rowan stood on his porch and watched smoke rise from the chimney of the small cabin where Eleanor Morrison still slept. 3 years of searching and fate had dropped her into his hands like a gift wrapped in thorns. The morning air was cool, but he knew the heat would build quickly. Summer in Texas was unforgiving, burning away everything soft until only the hardest parts remained. He had survived worse summers, worse years, worse losses. He would survive this too, even if the weight of his promise to Jack felt heavier now than it had in that prison cell. Ellie woke to sunlight streaming through the cabin window and the smell of wood smoke. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was, and panic seized her chest. Then memory returned. Fort Worth, Wolf, the stranger on the horse, the Double Star Ranch. She sat up, her body stiff from the unfamiliar mattress, and looked around the small room with clearer eyes than she'd had the night before. Someone had left supplies, a basin of water on the washstand. a bar of soap, clean towels, a simple dress draped over the chair, worn but serviceable, and beside it a pair of boots that looked close to her size. She rose and washed quickly, the cold water shocking her fully awake. The dress fit reasonably well, though it hung loose in places where she had lost weight during the weeks of Thomas's illness. The boots were slightly large, but infinitely better than bare feet. When she emerged from the cabin, the sun was already climbing toward its zenith. She had slept far longer than intended. In the yard between the cabin and the main house, she saw Stone working near the corral, his shirt already darkened with sweat despite the early hour. He was mending a section of fence, his movements economical and practiced. He looked up as she approached, his face unreadable. "There's breakfast in the main house," he said. "You should eat. I should be working. You're paying me to keep house, not sleep until noon." Something that might have been amusement flickered in his gray eyes. "It's barely 8 o'clock, Miss Morrison, and it's your first day. I think we can allow some flexibility." She followed him to the main house, acutely aware of the space he maintained between them, the careful way he held himself apart. The house was larger than it had seemed from outside, but still modest by any standard. A main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a cast-iron stove, 2 doors leading to what she assumed were bedrooms. The furnishings were sparse but well made. A man's space functional and unadorned. A plate waited on the table. Eggs, bacon, bread, still warm from the oven, more food than she had seen in weeks. "I don't expect you to cook for me," Ellie said. "That's supposed to be my job. I was up before dawn. Seemed foolish to wake you." Stone poured coffee from a pot on the stove, his movements sure and practiced. "When you're ready, you can start with the mending. There's a basket in the corner there. After that, the house could use a proper cleaning. I'm not much for domestic tasks." They worked in silence through the morning. Ellie tackled the mending, first grateful for work she knew well. Her fingers flew through the task, repairing tiers and replacing buttons, while Stone came and went, tending to ranch business. They spoke only when necessary, brief exchanges about where things were kept, what needed doing. By afternoon the basket was empty and the house transformed. Ellie had scrubbed floors, beaten rugs, washed windows until they gleamed. The physical labor felt good, grounding her in the present and pushing back the questions that swarmed like wasps whenever she let her mind wander. She was hanging laundry when she saw the rider approaching. The woman was perhaps 30, dressed in a plain riding skirt and white blouse, her dark red hair pulled back in a severe bun. She rode with confidence, handling her horse with the ease of someone raised to the saddle. When she dismounted near the main house, Stone came out to meet her. Ellie couldn't hear their conversation from where she stood, but she could read body language. The woman stood close to Stone, closer than necessary. Her hand touched his arm when she spoke. Stone's posture was stiff, uncomfortable, but he didn't pull away. After perhaps 10 minutes, the woman mounted her horse and rode away. Stone stood watching until she disappeared, then turned and caught Ellie staring. For a moment their eyes met across the yard. Then he turned and walked toward the barn without a word. That night Ellie lay in her narrow bed and thought about the woman with red hair. A former lover, a current one. It shouldn't matter. Stone's personal life was none of her concern. She was here to work, nothing more. But she couldn't quite silence the small voice that whispered questions into the darkness. The days fell into a pattern. Ellie rose early, prepared breakfast for both of them, then spent her days cleaning, mending, managing the household tasks Stone had neglected during his years alone. He worked from dawn until dusk, tending cattle, repairing buildings, doing the endless labor that ranch life demanded. They spoke little. Stone seemed content with silence, and Ellie had learned long ago that words were often more dangerous than quiet. But she watched him when he didn't know she was looking, studying the way he moved, the careful control he maintained over himself. There were moments when she caught him watching her too, his gray eyes holding an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Pain, maybe, or regret, something old and unhealed. The red-haired woman returned twice more in the first 2 weeks. Each visit was brief, each time leaving Stone more withdrawn than before. Ellie learned her name from the provisions delivery boy who came weekly from town. Rose Kane. Her brother owned a spread 15 miles east. Folks say she and Mr. Stone were engaged once. the boy offered, his young face earnest. But something happened. Some say he jilted her, others say she couldn't stomach his past. His past? Ellie kept her voice carefully neutral. The boy shrugged. Rumors mostly, that he rode with outlaws during the war, that he killed men, but Mr. Stone don't talk about it, so nobody knows for sure. After the boy left, Ellie stood in the quiet kitchen and felt the weight of secrets pressing down like a physical thing. This man who had rescued her, who had given her work and safety, who maintained such careful distance. What demons haunted him? What past did he carry like a stone in his pocket? And why, when she looked at him, did she sometimes see shadows of her father in the way he held himself, in the watchful stillness that marked men who had lived hard lives? On the 21st day, a letter arrived. The same provisions boy brought it, handing it to Ellie with a gap-toothed grin. The handwriting on the envelope was shaky but recognizable. Thomas. She tore it open, standing in the yard, her hands trembling. Dear Ellie, the letter began. I am well. The doctor says I am healing better than expected. I can walk now without getting tired, and my cough is almost gone. You saved my life, sister. I will never forget what you sacrificed for me. But I must tell you something troubling. Uncle Silas is gone. He left 3 days after your wedding, taking what little money remained. The landlady says he owed 2 months' rent and left in the middle of the night. I have been staying with the Reverend and his wife. They are kind, but I know I am a burden. Please write and tell me you are safe. I worry about you every day. Your loving brother, Thomas. Ellie read the letter 3 times, relief and anger warring in her chest. Thomas was healing. That was what mattered. But Silas had abandoned him, just as he had abandoned them all those years ago when their father died, just as her father had predicted he would. Weak Jack Hartwell had called his brother, and weakness Ellie was learning caused as much damage as cruelty. She wrote back immediately, assuring Thomas she was safe and well, that she had found honest work with an honorable man. She enclosed money for the Reverend's family and promised to send more each month. When she finished, she sealed the envelope and set it aside for the next provisions run. Stone found her sitting on the cabin steps as twilight fell, the letter still clutched in her hand. Bad news? He asked. My uncle abandoned my brother, left him with strangers while he ran from his debts. She looked up at Stone, seeing him silhouetted against the purple sky. Why do men run when things get difficult? Why do they choose cowardice over responsibility? Stone was quiet for a long moment. Some men aren't built to carry weight. It breaks them, and they'd rather flee than admit they're broken. And other men break too. They just hide it better. He walked away before she could respond, disappearing into the gathering darkness like smoke. The storm came on a night in early August, building slowly through the afternoon until the sky turned the color of old bruises. Ellie watched it approach from the cabin window, feeling tension coil in her stomach. She had hated storms since the night they took her father. It had been raining that night too, 3 years ago. Thunder drowning out the sound of horses' lightning, illuminating the faces of the men who dragged James Hartwell from their small house in chains. She remembered standing in the doorway, Thomas clinging to her skirts, watching her father's face as they led him away. He had looked back just once, and she had seen in his eyes that he knew he would never return. The first crack of thunder made her flinch. The second sent her to her feet, heart hammering. Rain began to fall in sheets, drumming on the cabin roof like artillery fire. Lightning split the sky, turning night to day for split seconds that burned after images into her vision. She tried to calm herself, to reason with the fear. She was safe. The cabin was solid. Stone was nearby if anything went wrong. But reason had no power over the terror that seized her when the next lightning strike hit close enough to shake the walls. Ellie found herself running without conscious decision, bursting out of the cabin into the rain, her nightdress plastered to her body within seconds. She ran across the yard to the main house and pounded on the door, rain streaming down her face, thunder rolling across the prairie like the voice of an angry god. The door opened. Stone stood there in his shirt sleeves, lamplight behind him turning his face to planes of light and shadow. He took in her appearance in one quick glance, her soaked nightdress, her bare feet, the terror she couldn't quite hide. "Come inside," he said, stepping back without hesitation. She stumbled into the warm, dry space of his home water pooling around her feet. Stone grabbed a blanket from the back of a chair and wrapped it around her shoulders, his touch impersonal but gentle. "Sit by the fire," he commanded, and she obeyed, sinking onto a chair near the hearth where flames danced and crackled. Stone poured whiskey into a cup and pressed it into her hands. "Drink." The liquor burned going down, but it pushed back the cold that had settled into her bones. She took another sip, then another, feeling warmth spread through her chest. Stone sat across from her, maintaining that careful distance he always kept. The storm raged outside, but here in this room, lit by firelight, surrounded by stone walls, and the solid presence of another human being, the fear began to recede. They sat in silence for a long time. The whiskey did its work, loosening the tight knot of tension in her chest. Rain hammered the roof. Wind howled around the corners of the house. Lightning continued to flash, but the terror had dulled to manageable dread. "My father died on a night like this," Ellie said finally. She hadn't meant to speak, but the whiskey and the late hour and the strange intimacy of shared silence loosened her tongue. "They came for him in the rain, took him away. I never saw him again." Stone's face was unreadable in the firelight. "How did he die?" "They said it was an accident, but I know better. They killed him." She looked directly at Stone, seeing the way the flames reflected in his gray eyes. "Do you believe in fate, Mr. Stone?" "No, I do. And I believe that you appearing in Wolf's office wasn't chance. I believe our paths were meant to cross." She set down the cup, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. "You knew my father." It wasn't a question. It was a statement delivered with the quiet certainty of someone who had been piecing together a puzzle and had finally seen the picture whole. Stone's jaw tightened, his hands resting on his knees curled into fists, but he didn't deny it, didn't try to lie. The silence stretched between them, taut as a rope under strain. "What was his name?" Stone asked finally. "Your father's real name." Ellie's breath caught. So he did know, had known all along. "James Morrison," she said. "That's the name I knew him by, the name on his grave marker. But there was another name, wasn't there? A name people whispered when they didn't know I was listening. A name that made men look at me with suspicion and fear." Thunder crashed closer now. Lightning illuminated the room bright as day, and in that flash of brilliance, Ellie saw Stone's face stripped of all pretense. Saw the pain there, the guilt, the weight of secrets carried too long. "James Hartwell," Stone said quietly. "Blackjack Hartwell, that was his real name." The truth, spoken aloud at last, hung in the air between them like gun smoke. Ellie closed her eyes, feeling tears slip down her cheeks. "I knew. I've known for 3 years. I just didn't know who else knew. Who else remembered?" "I remember," Stone said, and his voice was rough with emotion barely contained. "I'll never forget." They sat in the storm-wrapped darkness, two people bound by the ghost of a dead man, while outside the rain fell like tears, and the thunder spoke the language of old griefs. When Ellie finally returned to her cabin near dawn, the storm had passed. The world smelled clean and new, washed free of dust. But nothing between her and Caleb Stone would ever be clean or new again. The truth once spoken could not be unspoken, and truths Ellie was learning were often more dangerous than lies. 4 days later, the rider came. Ellie saw him first, a silhouette against the morning sun approaching at an easy canter. Something about the way he sat his horse, the casual confidence of his posture, set her nerves jangling with warning. Stone emerged from the barn, saw the rider, and went very still. His hand drifted toward the gun he wore, a gesture so slight Ellie might have missed it if she hadn't been watching him so carefully these past weeks. The rider reined in at the edge of the yard. He was perhaps 40, well-dressed, in a way that spoke of money and education. His suit was tailored, his boots polished despite the dust of the trail. He had the kind of face that would be handsome if not for the coldness in his blue eyes, the cruelty that lurked in the set of his mouth. "Caleb Rowan," the man said, his voice cultured and mocking. "Or is it Stone these days? I lose track of your various names." "Marcus." Stone's voice was flat, emotionless. "You're not welcome here." "Oh, I think you'll want to hear what I have to say." Marcus Kane, for Ellie, had already guessed who this must be, swung down from his horse with practiced grace. "I've come to collect a debt. I don't owe you anything." "No. What about your share of the Hartwell take? The 50,000 in gold that Black Jack hid before the marshal's men caught him. I figure that's worth at least 15,000 to you, maybe 20, given your special relationship with our dear departed leader." Stone's face might have been carved from granite. "There is no gold. Jack died broke. We all did." "Interesting. Because I've spent 3 years following leads, tracking down every member of the old gang, and you know what I learned?" Marcus smiled, showing too many teeth. "Everyone swears there's no gold, but everyone's lying, and I know how to make liars tell the truth." He turned his gaze to Ellie, who had frozen near the cabin porch. His eyes traveled over her slowly, appraisingly, and she felt her skin crawl. "Who's this new housekeeper? She's prettier than your last one." He took a step toward her. "What's your name, darling?" "That's none of your concern," Stone said, his voice hard as iron. "Get back on your horse and ride, Marcus. There's nothing for you here." "Oh, I think there's quite a lot here." Marcus pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. "See, I got a telegram last week from an associate in Fort Worth. Said a girl matching a very specific description had been seen with you. Daughter of James Hartwell, thought to be using the name Morrison. And here she is standing right in front of me." The world tilted beneath Ellie's feet. She grabbed the porch rail for support, her mind racing. How did he know? How could he possibly know? Stone moved between them, his hand now openly on his gun. "Leave, now, or what you'll shoot me, in front of the girl. I wonder what she'd think of that, Caleb. Does she know what you are, what you did?" Marcus's smile widened. "Does she know you rode with her father, that you were there the night the marshal's men ambushed the gang at Miller's Creek? That some folks say you were the one who sold them out?" "That's a lie," Stone said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "Is it? Then why don't you tell her the truth? Tell her exactly what happened that night. Tell her about the deal you tried to make with the marshal, the promise of amnesty if you'd testify against Black Jack. Tell her how it all went wrong, how men died because you thought you could play both sides." Ellie's vision blurred. The words were coming at her too fast, each one a hammer blow. Stone had ridden with her father's gang. Stone had been there when her father was captured. Stone might have been the reason her father died. "Ellie," Stone said, turning toward her. In his face she saw desperation, saw him reaching for words that wouldn't come. "It's not what you think. I can explain." But Marcus wasn't finished. "Tell her the rest, Caleb. Tell her how you promised Black Jack you'd look after his children if anything happened to him. Tell her how you've been searching for her for 3 years. Tell her why." Stone's face had gone white. "Marcus, so help me God." "Oh, I'm not afraid of your threats, not anymore. Not when I hold all the cards." Marcus looked at Ellie again, his expression calculating. "Your father had something that belongs to me, Miss Hartwell, and I think you might know where it is." "I don't know what you're talking about," Ellie said, finding her voice at last. It came out stronger than she felt, cold and clear. "My father left us nothing but debts. Your father was many things, but stupid wasn't one of them. He knew he might not walk away from Miller's Creek. He would have made arrangements, hidden something for his precious children." Marcus took another step closer. "I want 30% of the Hartwell gold. If I don't get it, I start telling people who you really are. And trust me, there are plenty of folks who'd pay good money to know where Black Jack's daughter ended up. Men he wronged. Men who'd see hurting you as justice for what he did to them." The threat hung in the air, ugly and explicit. Stone's gun cleared leather in a blur of motion, the hammer cocking with a sharp click. "Get on your horse, right away. Don't come back. This is your only warning." Marcus raised his hands in mock surrender, but his smile never wavered. "I'll go, but I'll be back, Caleb, and next time I won't come alone. Think about my offer, 30%. It's more than fair considering the alternative." He mounted his horse with deliberate slowness, making it clear he wasn't intimidated by the gun pointed at his chest. "Miss Hartwell, it's been a pleasure. I look forward to our next conversation." Then he was gone, cantering away across the prairie, leaving silence and destruction in his wake. Ellie and Stone stood in the yard, separated by 10 feet that might as well have been miles. The truth, all of it, lay exposed between them like a corpse. "Ellie," Stone began, holstering his gun. "Please, let me explain. You knew who I was from the beginning." Her voice was steady, but inside she was breaking into pieces. "That first day in Wolf's office, you knew." "Yes." "And you brought me here because of a promise you made to my father. Not because you needed a housekeeper, not because you wanted to help, because you owed him a debt. It wasn't like that. It's more complicated than, were you there? She cut him off, her eyes boring into his. At Miller's Creek, when they caught him, were you there? The silence was answer enough. Did you betray him? The question came out barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of 3 years of grief of lies, of carefully maintained illusions about who her father had been and how he had died. Stone's face contorted with pain. No, I swear on everything I hold sacred, I did not betray Jack. I tried to save him. I failed. But you were one of them. An outlaw. A criminal. She laughed, the sound brittle and broken. My father was a good man. That's what I told myself. A good man who made one mistake, who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But he wasn't, was he? He was exactly what they said, a thief, a killer, and you were right there beside him. Your father was a good man, Stone said fiercely. He was better than the rest of us. He had a code, a sense of honor most outlaws never find. Yes, he stole. Yes, he killed when he had to. But he protected his crew, he never hurt innocents, and he died trying to save his brother. Don't let Marcus Kane poison what you remember about Jack. How can I trust anything you say? You've been lying to me from the moment we met. I kept secrets. That's not the same as lying. It's exactly the same. The words burst out of her, all the fear and confusion of the past weeks finding voice at last. You let me believe you were just a rancher who happened to be in the right place at the right time. You let me think you were some kind of hero saving me from Wolf out of the goodness of your heart, but it was all a lie. You were just trying to ease your guilty conscience. That's not fair. Fair, you want to talk about fair? Ellie's voice rose, 3 years of buried rage breaking free. My father died believing I was safe. He died thinking I'd never know the truth about what he was. And now I learned that not only was he an outlaw, but the man I've been living with. The man I was starting to trust was part of it all. Was there the night my world ended. Tears streamed down her face, now hot and bitter. Stone took a step toward her, one hand reaching out, and she stumbled backward. Don't touch me. Don't come near me. Ellie, please, just let me explain. There's more you need to know about your father, about that night, about why I'm here. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear any more lies disguised as truth. She turned toward the cabin, her whole body shaking. I'll work out my contract. You paid me for 10 months, and I'll give you 10 months of labor. But after that, I'm gone. Thomas and I will leave, and you can find someone else to absolve your guilt. She made it to the cabin door before her legs gave out. She collapsed against the frame, her whole body racked with sobs that felt like they might tear her apart. Behind her she heard Stone's footsteps, heard them stop a few feet away. Your father's last words were about you, he said quietly. About you and Thomas. He made me promise to keep you safe, to give you the life he couldn't. I've been searching for you for 3 years, Ellie, not because I felt guilty, because I loved him like a brother, and I owe him everything good I ever knew. She didn't turn around, couldn't bear to look at him. I know you don't believe me right now, Stone continued. I know Marcus planted seeds of doubt that will take root and grow. But I need you to know one thing, and it's the God's honest truth. I did not betray your father. I would have died for him. Almost did. And I will protect you no matter what it costs me, because that's what I promised him, and because you deserve better than what this world has tried to give you. His footsteps retreated. Ellie heard the door of the main house close. She crawled inside her cabin and closed the door, sliding the bolt home. Then she curled up on the narrow bed and let the sobs take her mourning, not just her father, but the illusions she had carried for 3 years. The belief that he had been innocent, the hope that she could escape his shadow, the fragile trust she had begun to place in Caleb Stone. All of it ashes now, all of it gone. Outside, the sun climbed toward its zenith, indifferent to human suffering. The prairie stretched in all directions, vast and empty, offering neither comfort nor answers. Cattle lowed in the distance. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals only it could sense. And in the main house, Caleb Stone sat at his table with his head in his hands, feeling the weight of promises made to dead men, and the impossibility of keeping them when the living refused to be saved. The second part of this story ends here, with secrets exposed and trust shattered, with 2 people who might have found something like peace instead driven apart by the ghosts they carried and the truths they could no longer avoid. The unraveling had begun, and once the threads started pulling loose, there would be no stopping until the whole tapestry came apart. September 1st arrived with the kind of heat that made the air shimmer like water over the Texas prairie. 3 days had passed since Marcus Kane's visit, 3 days since the careful peace between Ellie and Caleb Stone had shattered like glass under a hammer. They moved around each other like ghosts, haunting the same house, speaking only when work demanded it, their words clipped and formal. Ellie performed her duties with mechanical precision. She cooked meals that Stone ate in silence. She cleaned rooms he vacated as she entered. She mended clothes and tended the garden and did everything her contract required, but the warmth that had begun to grow between them, fragile as spring grass, had withered to nothing. Stone tried twice to explain, to finish what he had started to say that terrible afternoon. Both times Ellie walked away before he could complete a sentence. She couldn't bear to hear more, couldn't bear to have the few remaining illusions she carried stripped away by truths she wasn't ready to face. On the morning of the 4th day, she was hanging laundry when she heard a horse approach. Her hands stilled on the wet sheet she was pinning to the line, fear lancing through her chest. Was it Marcus returning with his threats? But when she turned, she saw it was a woman, the red-haired woman, Rose Kane. Rose dismounted with easy grace and tied her horse to the fence rail. She was dressed simply today in a brown riding skirt and cream-colored blouse, her hair braided and pinned in a coronet around her head. Up close, Ellie could see lines of worry around her eyes that made her seem older than her 30 years, with fine lines around her eyes and mouth. "Miss Morrison," Rose said, her voice carefully neutral. "May I speak with you?" Ellie's first instinct was to refuse to send this woman away before more poison could be poured into wounds still raw and bleeding. But something in Rose's expression, a kind of weary sadness, made her pause. "Mr. Stone is out checking the north fence line," Ellie said. "He won't be back until evening." "I know. I waited until I saw him ride out. It's you I came to see." They sat on the porch of the cabin, two women bound by connections to men who carried violence in their pasts like scars. Rose accepted the water Ellie offered and drank deeply before speaking. "My brother came to see you," Rose said. It wasn't a question. "Marcus has a way of leaving damage in his wake. I wanted to warn you, but I was too late." "Warn me about what?" "About the lies he tells, the truths he twists until they're worse than lies." Rose set down the cup, her hands trembling slightly. "Marcus said Caleb betrayed your father. That's not true, at least not the way Marcus told it." Ellie's throat tightened. "How do you know what my father's name was? How do you know anything about this?" "Because I was married to one of the Hartwell gang, Luke Patterson. He died at Miller's Creek, shot by a marshal's deputy while trying to cover the retreat. Before he died, he told me what happened that night. The real story, not the version Marcus peddles." The laundry flapped on the line behind them, sheets snapping in the hot wind. Ellie felt the world tilt slightly, as if the ground beneath her feet had become unreliable. "Tell me," she said. Rose's eyes were distant, looking at memories years old, but still sharp enough to cut. "Caleb Rowan went to the marshal 6 months before Miller's Creek. He wanted out of the life, wanted to go straight, build something clean. The marshal offered him a deal, testify against the gang's fence, the man buying their stolen goods, and he'd get amnesty." Caleb agreed, but he made one condition. The gang itself, the men he'd ridden with, they had to be left alone, given a chance to scatter and start over. The marshal agreed. He lied. He never intended to honor the deal. He wanted Black Jack Hartwell, wanted him bad, so he followed Caleb, used him without his knowledge. When the gang hit the bank in Abilene, the marshal's men were waiting. Not because Caleb told them, because they'd been following him for weeks, watching to see where the gang would strike next. Ellie closed her eyes, seeing it now. The betrayal that wasn't a betrayal, the good intentions that had paved a road to hell. "Caleb found out the morning of the Miller's Creek job," Rose continued. "He rode hard to warn them to call it off, but he was too late. The ambush was already set. He rode in anyway, tried to help them escape. That's when Luke was shot, and your father was captured. Why didn't anyone know this? Why did they think Caleb was the traitor? Because the marshal spread that story. wanted to turn the survivors against Caleb, keep them from ever working together again. And because Caleb never defended himself, he felt too guilty about what happened, even though it wasn't his fault. Guilt can be a kind of prison, Miss Morrison. Sometimes worse than the ones with bars. The words settled over Ellie like a blanket, heavy and smothering. She had been so ready to believe the worst of Stone, so quick to let Marcus Kane's poison take root. But what if she had been wrong? What if the man who had saved her, who had kept a promise to her dying father, was exactly who he appeared to be? A man trying to atone for sins he didn't commit. A man carrying weight that wasn't his to carry. Rose stood smoothing her skirts. There's something else you should know, something Marcus didn't tell you because it doesn't serve his purposes. What? Caleb had a wife, Sarah Rowan. She died 2 years ago. Rose's voice softened. Marcus will tell you Caleb killed her. That's his favorite lie, the one he uses when he wants to turn people against Caleb. But the truth is, Sarah killed herself. The words hit Ellie like a physical blow. Why? Because she couldn't live with what Caleb had been. She was a good woman, religious, believed strongly in right and wrong, with no room for gray between them. When she learned that Caleb had ridden with outlaws, that he'd killed men during the war and after it broke something in her, she tried to make him into something he wasn't, tried to erase his past with prayer and penance. But you can't erase the past. You can only learn to carry it. Rose moved toward her horse, then paused. One night Sarah confronted Caleb. She'd found letters he'd written to your father in prison money he'd sent to help Jack's family. She said she couldn't be married to a man who still had loyalty to criminals. She said she'd rather die than live with a killer. And then she went upstairs and threw herself from the second-floor landing. Caleb tried to catch her. He has scars on his hands from where he grabbed for her and hit the railing instead. But he couldn't save her. Rose's eyes glistened with unshed tears. He's been trying to save people ever since, trying to make up for the one person he couldn't save. I think that's why he looked for you so hard, why he made that promise to your father in the first place. He thought if he could protect you, it might balance the scales somehow. She mounted her horse, looking down at Ellie with an expression that might have been pity or understanding or both. My brother is going to come back, Miss Morrison. When he does, he'll bring men with him. Men who care nothing for truth or justice, only for money. If there's gold hidden somewhere, Marcus will do anything to find it. Anything. Don't let him use you against Caleb, and don't let Caleb's past blind you to who he is now. Rose rode away, leaving Ellie alone with thoughts that churned like storm clouds. She sat on the cabin porch until the sun began its descent, watching shadows lengthen across the yard, trying to reconcile the man she thought she knew with the man Rose had described. A man who had tried to do right and been punished for it. A man whose wife had chosen death over accepting his past. A man who had spent 3 years searching for her and Thomas, not to ease his guilt but to honor a promise made to a dying friend. She thought about the careful distance Stone maintained, the way he never touched her unless necessity demanded it. The quiet pain she sometimes glimpsed in his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. She had taken that distance for indifference or calculation. But what if it was respect? What if it was the caution of a man who had learned that his presence sometimes brought destruction to the people he tried to protect? That night, Ellie knocked on the door of the main house. Stone opened it, surprise flickering across his face before he schooled it to neutrality. "I'd like to hear it," she said. "The truth about Miller's Creek, about my father, all of it." He stepped back, letting her enter. They sat at his table, a lamp between them casting more shadows than light, and he told her everything. About the deal with the marshal that had gone wrong, about riding hard to warn the gang and arriving too late, about watching men die, men he'd called friends, while he tried desperately to salvage a situation already beyond saving. "Your father was shot in the chest during the firefight," Stone said, his voice rough with memory. "I pulled him out of the crossfire, got him behind cover. Silas was pinned down near the creek. Your father made me go back for him. Said Silas was weak and wouldn't survive without help, so I went. And my father was captured while you were saving his brother. Yes. By the time I got back with Silas, the marshal's men had Jack in chains. I tried to fight through to him, got shot twice for my trouble. Silas dragged me away. We ran and your father paid the price for our survival." Ellie studied his face in the lamplight, seeing the weight he carried in every line, every shadow. Rose Kane came to see me today. She told me about your wife, about Sarah. Stone's jaw tightened. Rose talks too much. She said Sarah couldn't accept what you'd been, that she killed herself rather than live with your past. That's the truth of it. Sarah was a good woman who deserved better than me. I tried to be what she needed, but I couldn't erase what I'd done. Couldn't become someone I wasn't, and it killed her. He looked directly at Ellie, his gray eyes holding hers. That's why I've kept my distance from you. That's why I've been careful not to let this become anything more than what our agreement specified. Because everyone I try to protect ends up hurt. Everyone I care about pays for my past. That's not true. Isn't it? Your father trusted me to keep the gang safe. He died in prison. Sarah loved me and threw herself from a staircase. Even you, I brought you here thinking I could give you a fresh start, and all I've done is drag you deeper into the mess I made. Ellie reached across the table, placing her hand over his. He flinched, as if burned, but didn't pull away. My father made his own choices, she said quietly. He chose to go back for Silas. He chose to be an outlaw, to take the risks that came with that life. His death isn't your responsibility. And Sarah, she made a choice too. Maybe it was the wrong choice, maybe she was sick in ways you couldn't see or fix. But that wasn't your fault either, Ellie. I'm not finished. You've been carrying guilt for things you didn't do, taking blame for other people's decisions. And I've been doing the same thing, blaming you for my father's death, blaming him for leaving me, blaming myself for not seeing the truth sooner. But maybe it's time we both stopped carrying weight that doesn't belong to us. The silence between them felt different now, not empty, but full charged with possibility. Before Stone could respond, they heard the sound of an approaching horse, then another, then several more. Stone was on his feet in an instant, his hand on his gun. Get back to your cabin. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me. What's happening? Marcus is back, and he brought friends. Ellie ran to the cabin, her heart hammering against her ribs. From the window she watched 5 riders enter the yard, Marcus Kane at their head. The men with him had the hard look of hired guns, men who killed for money and asked no questions about why. She saw Stone step out onto his porch, his rifle held ready, but not quite pointed at the riders. Saw Marcus smile that cold smile and say something she couldn't hear from this distance. Saw Stone shake his head. Then she saw movement from the corner of her eye. A 6th rider, this one, coming from the direction of the road, small, riding a horse too large, bouncing in the saddle with the awkwardness of inexperience. Thomas, her brother, who should have been safe in town with the Reverend's family, was riding straight into a standoff between armed men. Ellie didn't think. She burst from the cabin and ran toward the approaching rider, shouting his name. Thomas saw her and waved his young face, breaking into a smile of relief and joy. He never saw Marcus Kane ride up beside him until it was too late. Marcus grabbed Thomas's reins, pulling the boy's horse to a stop. In one smooth motion, he drew a knife from his boot and pressed it against Thomas's throat. "Well now," Marcus called out loud enough for everyone to hear, "looks like we have ourselves some leverage." Ellie froze in the middle of the yard, every muscle locked with terror. Stone took a step forward, his rifle coming up, but Marcus pressed the knife harder, and a thin line of blood appeared on Thomas's neck. "I wouldn't," Marcus said pleasantly. "The boy dies if you so much as twitch wrong. Now, Miss Hartwell, I believe we were having a conversation about gold. Why don't you and I finish it?" "Let him go," Ellie said, her voice steadier than she felt. "He's just a boy. He has nothing to do with this." "Oh, I think he has everything to do with this. Family is what makes people talk, isn't it? Family is what makes them give up secrets they'd otherwise take to the grave." Marcus smiled at her over Thomas's trembling shoulder. "Your father told me something before he died. Told me you had the key to finding what he hid. I didn't believe him then. Thought it was just the ramblings of a man facing the rope. But now I think maybe he was telling the truth." "There is no gold," Ellie cried. "How many times do people have to tell you that? Then you won't mind proving it. Your father gave you something, didn't he? Some keepsake, some token, something you've kept all these years. I want to see it." Ellie's hand went instinctively to her throat, to the thin chain that held her mother's locket. She had worn it every day since her mother's death, a small silver oval that contained nothing but her parents' portraits painted on ivory. It was all she had left of them. "The locket," Marcus said, seeing the gesture. "That's it, isn't it? Take it off. Bring it here." "No," Stone said, his voice hard as iron. "Ellie, don't give him anything." Marcus pressed the knife harder. Thomas whimpered, his eyes wide with fear. More blood welled from the cut. "Your choice," Marcus said. "The locket or the boy's life. Decide quickly. My hand sometimes slips when I get impatient." Ellie's hands shook as she unfastened the chain. She had never opened the locket, never seen what it contained beyond the portraits visible when you first opened it. Her father had given it to her mother on their wedding day, and her mother had given it to Ellie on her deathbed. It was precious beyond measure, but not more precious than Thomas's life. She walked slowly toward Marcus, the locket dangling from her fingers. When she was close enough, he snatched it from her hand and shoved Thomas away. The boy tumbled from his horse and scrambled toward Ellie, who caught him and held him tight. Marcus opened the locket with eager fingers. The portraits were there just as Ellie remembered. He pried at them, clearly expecting to find something hidden behind. When nothing appeared, he grew more frantic, digging at the locket's backing with his knife, until finally something small and folded fell into his palm. A piece of paper yellowed with age, covered in her father's handwriting. Marcus unfolded it with shaking hands, his eyes scanning the words. Ellie watched his expression change from triumph to confusion to rage. "What is this?" he snarled. "What kind of trick?" He threw the paper at her. It fluttered to the ground, and Ellie picked it up, reading her father's words for the first time. "To whoever finds this," the letter read, "if you're reading these words, it means you've hurt my daughter to get them. There is no gold. There never was. The stories were lies I spread to protect my family, to make people think I had resources I could use for revenge if anything happened to them. The only treasure I ever had was Eleanor and Thomas, and you've just proven you're not worthy of knowing them. May you choke on your greed. James Hartwell." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then Marcus screamed a sound of pure frustrated rage and pulled his gun. Everything happened in the space between heartbeats. Marcus aimed at Ellie. Stone's rifle cracked, but Marcus was already moving, and the bullet that should have killed him only grazed his shoulder. He fired back, and Stone went down. One of Marcus's men raised his gun toward Thomas, and Ellie didn't think. She dove for Stone's revolver where it had fallen from his belt, rolled, came up firing. The shot went wild, but it was enough to make the man duck. Marcus, bleeding and enraged, swung his gun back toward her. "You bitch! You and your father always thinking you're better than everyone else. I'll kill you both, the whole damn family." Another shot rang out, this one from the porch of the main house. Marcus jerked, looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest, and fell from his horse. Ellie turned to see Rose Kane standing there, Stone's rifle in her hands, her face pale but determined. "I told you my brother was going to get people killed," Rose said quietly. "I just didn't realize I'd be the one to stop him." The other riders, seeing their employer dead and facing a woman with a rifle and another with a revolver, made the smart choice. They wheeled their horses and fled, leaving Marcus's body cooling in the dust. Ellie ran to where Stone had fallen. He was conscious, but bleeding from a wound in his shoulder, his face tight with pain. "How bad?" she asked, kneeling beside him. "I've had worse." He tried to smile, but it came out as more of a grimace. "The boy, Thomas, is fine, just scared." She pressed her hand against the wound, trying to slow the bleeding. "Don't you dare die, Caleb Stone. You don't get to make promises to my father and then leave before you keep them." "Bossy." He managed, his voice weak. "I like that about you." Rose helped them get Stone into the house and onto his bed. The bullet had gone clean through the meat of his shoulder, missing bone and major blood vessels. Painful, but not fatal. Rose, who had apparently picked up medical knowledge from years of ranch life, cleaned and bandaged the wound with efficient movements. Thomas sat in the corner, wrapped in a blanket despite the heat, his eyes huge in his pale face. Ellie went to him, holding him as he shook with delayed shock. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I got your letter saying where you were, and I wanted to see you. I didn't know it would be dangerous." "It's not your fault, Thomas. None of this is your fault." She pulled back enough to look at him, this boy who had ridden into danger just to see his sister. and she realized he wasn't quite a boy anymore. He was taller than when she'd left Fort Worth, his face losing its childish roundness. He had survived illness and abandonment and had still come looking for her. He was stronger than she'd given him credit for. "Thomas," she said gently, "there's something I need to tell you, something I just learned myself." And she told him. About Silas, about the truth of his parentage, about the second letter, the one Silas had left with the Reverend to be given to Thomas only after his death. In it, Silas had finally confessed the truth about Thomas's parentage and his own cowardice. She watched his face as he processed the information, saw him struggle with it. "So Silas was my real father?" Thomas asked finally. "And he just left me." "He was weak," Ellie said. "He couldn't be what you needed, but you have to know our father, the man who raised you, James Hartwell. He loved you. He chose you. That matters more than blood." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked in a small voice, "Are you still my sister?" Ellie felt tears sting her eyes. She pulled him close, holding him tight. "I will always be your sister. Blood or not, choice or not, you're my family. That will never change. Forever, forever." From the bedroom, Stone's voice called out weakly, "Ellie, I need to tell you something." She left Thomas with Rose and went to Stone's bedside. He looked pale, his shoulder heavily bandaged, but his eyes were clear. "You saved my life," he said. "Again. We're even then. You saved mine first. There's something I need you to know, something I should have said days ago, but I was too afraid." He took a breath, wincing at the pull on his injured shoulder. "When I first saw you in Wolf's office, I did recognize you. You looked so much like your father it hurt. I brought you here because of a promise I made to him, yes. But these past weeks, watching you work, watching you care for this place, and for Thomas, talking to you in the quiet moments, I've come to care for you. Not as Jack's daughter, as Eleanor Morrison, as the woman you are." Ellie's breath caught. "Caleb, I know the timing is terrible. I know you have every reason not to trust me, but I need you to know before anything else happens that I love you. Not the ghost of your father, you." The words hung in the air between them, fragile and precious. Ellie looked at this man who had kept promises to dead men, who had searched for years to find her, who had taken a bullet meant for her without hesitation. This man who carried scars both visible and hidden, who had loved before and lost, who was offering her his heart, despite every reason to protect it. "I love you too," she said quietly, "and I hate it." He looked stricken. "Hate it because I don't know if you love me, or if you love who you think I should be. The innocent daughter your friend wanted protected, the woman who can absolve your guilt." The tears came now hot and bitter. "How do I know you're not just trying to save me because you couldn't save Sarah, because you couldn't save my father?" Stone tried to sit up, gasped at the pain, and fell back. "Eleanor Morrison," he said, his voice fierce despite his weakness. "The woman who sold herself to save her brother, the woman who stood up to Harrison Wolfe and Marcus Kane without flinching. The woman who can sew and shoot, who speaks French and isn't afraid to cry when the storms come. That's who I love. Not some imagined innocent, not a stand-in for ghosts. You." Ellie knelt beside the bed, taking his hand in both of hers. "I need time," she said. "Time to figure out who I am when I'm not running from my past or trying to live up to what everyone expects. Time to heal from all of this. I can give you time. I have the rest of my life, if that's what you need." She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his hand. "Ask me again in 6 months. When the wounds have healed and the dead have been properly mourned. When we both know who we are without the weight of all these secrets." "I'll wait," he promised, "however long it takes." Outside, the Texas sun continued its arc across the sky, indifferent to human drama. The body of Marcus Kane was buried in an unmarked grave at the edge of Stone's property, next to the creek where he had tried to claim treasure that never existed. Rose stayed for 3 days, helping nurse her brother's killer back to health, then rode away with a promise to testify to the sheriff about Marcus's crimes. Thomas recovered quickly as the young do his resilience greater than the trauma he'd endured. He stayed at the Double Star Ranch, sleeping in the small room off the kitchen, helping with chores, learning the rhythms of ranch life. The days turned to weeks, the weeks to months. Autumn came painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber. Ellie and Stone fell into a new rhythm, working side by side but sleeping apart, building trust one careful day at a time. On a March morning in 1875, 6 months after the confrontation with Marcus Kane, Ellie woke to find the prairie covered in wildflowers. It happened sometimes after the spring rains, a riot of color that lasted only days before the summer heat burned it away. She walked to the creek, to the place where the rock still bore her father's initials, carved years ago. From her pocket, she drew a knife and knelt beside the stone. Slowly, carefully, she added new letters beneath the old. E.M. and C.S., 1875. And below that, not all debts are paid in gold. She stood back, examining her work. It wasn't elegant, but it was true. The debts that mattered, the ones that actually counted, had nothing to do with money or treasure. They were paid in promises, kept in protection, offered in love, given freely, despite every reason to hold it back. Footsteps behind her made her turn. Stone stood there, his arm still in a sling, though the wound had healed well. Thomas was with him, leading 3 horses. "We thought you might like to ride out to the north pasture," Stone said. "See the flowers before they fade." Ellie looked at them, these 2 men who had become her family. Not the family she was born to, but the one she had chosen, the one that had chosen her in return. "I have an answer," she said to Stone, "to the question you asked 6 months ago." He went very still. "And, yes," she smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. "Yes, I'll marry you, not because I need saving, not because of promises made to dead men, but because I choose you, because you choose me, because we've both earned the right to build something new from the ruins of our pasts." Stone crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides, pulling her into his arms with his good hand. When he kissed her, it tasted of new beginnings and old sorrows finally laid to rest. Thomas whooped with joy, startling the horses and making them all laugh. They mounted up and rode across the prairie together, 3 souls who had found each other through darkness and chosen to walk into the light. Behind them, the stone bore witness to promises kept and debts repaid. Before them, the prairie stretched endless, beneath a sky so blue it hurt to look at. And around them the wildflowers bloomed, brief and brilliant, and utterly themselves, asking nothing more than to exist in this moment, this place, this precious fleeting now. The third part of this story ends here, with questions answered and futures claimed with love, found not despite the past, but because of it, with 3 people who learned that the greatest treasure is not gold buried in the ground, but connection forged through fire and held despite everything that tried to tear it apart. The devil had made his bargain, but in the end he walked away empty-handed. Because some debts can only be paid in courage, in trust, in the willingness to stand beside someone and say, "I choose this, I choose you, I choose us." And that, it turned out, was worth more than all the gold in Texas.